I'm Charles Carithers, class of 2005 Morehouse College, class of 2007 Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, principal with Cornerstone Government Affairs, and adjunct professor at Georgetown University. I spent 11 years in the United States intelligence community and 2 years as a national security advisor on Capitol Hill.
Hi, I'm Gary Shiffman. I am the CEO and co-founder of two risk-based technology companies. One's Giant Oak and one's called Consilient. I'm also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. My background is one of behavioral science and illicit activities, and that is I'm an economist. I have a PhD in economics, and I have spent my career thinking about and building models of human behavior with an emphasis on illicit behaviors such as terrorism, insurgency, crime, corruption, fraud, coercion, different types of illicit actors, networks, and behaviors is my area of focus. I started my career in the military. I served in the Gulf War. I worked on Capitol Hill as a national security advisor. I was the first generation of leadership in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So I've had a career in government, in academia, and in business and industry, but always focusing on the application of behavioral science to illicit activities. And it is just great to be here with you today.
Thank you, Gary. As a graduate of Morehouse College, with a deep respect for our dear institution's Crown Forum, it's very special to be with you today to talk about national security and what its importance is to the global landscape. This will be the first of 3 lectures designed to develop an awareness of the threats and national security and foreign policy challenges facing the United States homeland and our interests abroad, as well as how we as a nation address these hard problems and why these issues should matter to men of Morehouse, especially those interested in careers in the national security sector. So to kick things off, we're going to paint a picture for you of the threat that faces the United States and the nature of conflict. The United States faces a myriad of threats to our homeland and abroad, what former Director of National Intelligence Jim Clapper describes as the litany of doom. From extremism to terrorism to cybersecurity to traditional state actors, there are no shortage of threats and hard problems that our nation's national security professionals face. So why should you care? The mission of Morehouse College is to develop men with disciplined minds who will lead lives of leadership and service. So as Morehouse prepares you and provides you with that foundation, that rich foundation to become a public leader and seek careers in public service, these are the very hard problems that inform our nation's foreign policy and national security that you will help shape.
Charles, I want to thank you for your leadership and for organizing this session and for just the joy of getting to know and working with you over the past year on these important national security issues. I want to start our conversation, and again, I want to emphasize that this is the first of several conversations we hope to have and plan to have with the students of Morehouse. And that is, I want to frame the context in which we view violence, crime, insurgency, terrorism, domestic extremism, international terrorism. Sometimes these are referred to as sub-state actors. Sometimes we refer to these groups by their ideological characteristics, radical Islamic extremism, Islamic terrorism, drug traffickers, drug cartels, Colombian drug cartels, insurgencies, the Lord's Resistance Army. We use these labels, and I want to start with maybe taking a step back and thinking about humans, human behavior, fundamental human nature as a way of approaching this this world of this litany of doom that General Clapper mentioned that you just quoted. So as I said, I'm an economist and I think about human behavior and behavioral science. And it's interesting that we sometimes pass over the human aspect of organized violence, but everybody who engages in an act of terrorism, in an act of insurgency, an act of drug trafficking, human trafficking, of violence of some sorts, they're humans. And we know things about humans. We have a science of human behavior. There's economics, there's sociology, there's anthropology, there's psychology. There's basically a large body of many years of literature on human behavior. And what I suggest is we start with this idea of human behavior and then step into organized violence. And what I'll talk about over the course of the series of conversations and lectures that we have with Morehouse is this idea of thinking about economic terms like firms, entrepreneurs, and markets, as opposed to saying it's this type of terrorism, it's this type of crime, it's this type of insurgency, those labels I used a few minutes ago. Instead, think about firms, entrepreneurs, and competitive markets, because I think that's a great way to capture what happens in life and in human behavior. So what do I mean by that? So Pablo Escobar is a great example. Pablo Escobar is, history books will call him the first narco-terrorist, at least in modern times, the first narco-terrorist. But he's a great example of the complexity and yet simplicity of what I'm talking about. The Drug Enforcement Administration in the United States had the lead in pursuing or supporting the Colombian government in pursuing Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar in the 1980s was the world's most wanted criminal. He was making billions of dollars in profits on the sale of cocaine being produced in Colombia, shipped into the United States, and sold in the United States. Pablo Escobar also had grand political ambitions. He blew up buildings in Medellin. He was involved in assassinations, and in fact, he actually blew up a commercial airliner full of innocent people. So the things that Pablo Escobar did are very consistent with a drug trafficker, the head of a transnational criminal organization. He also engaged in activities very consistent with an insurgency, somebody leading an armed group who seeks to take over governing responsibilities in a portion of a country. And he also engaged in acts consistent with terrorism. And that is killing innocent civilians, whether on the streets of Medellin or on the Avianca airliner that he blew up for political purposes. So we think about this litany of doom. I keep coming back to that phrase, Charles. I'm so glad you raised it. We think about this and we think about how to organize it. And the way in which people commonly organize this litany is in terms of there are criminals, there are insurgents, and there are terrorists. And one of the things that I want to explore over, tonight or today in the next couple lectures is how can we use the science of human behavior and social science to make sense of it. So just definitionally, if you were to use the term terrorism, the common definition, the commonly held definition, all of these are debatable, but there are, every now and then, there are a consensus is developed around certain ideas and definitions. So terrorism is an act of violence or the threat of violence perpetrated against civilians, so non-combatants, for political purposes. So if someone were to engage in an act of violence or threaten violence against non-combatants for political purposes, those are the big the big sort of core building blocks of the definition of terrorism. Insurgency is defined in the academic literature as a conflict with a large number of battle deaths, so over 1,000 a year. For some reason, academics have kind of settled on this idea of over 1,000 a year qualifies for for inclusion in databases on civil wars and insurgencies. We can all debate that. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what the preponderance of literature says. So there are groups competing. The groups can be one group is often a governmental agency or the government, the central government. And then there are armed groups who seek to wrest or take power away from that government agency or that government. I actually believe that insurgents can have lesser goals than overthrow of the entire government. Insurgents can want to take over a portion of population centers. For example, I believe that the drug cartels in Mexico can be categorized as insurgents. Some of them can, because they actually step in and govern large portions of population centers in Mexico. So they're not seeking to take over the entire federal government of Mexico, but they're seeking to control a particular area. I think that fits within the definition of an insurgency. Organized crime is a very large topic in the United States. It's been the subject of national strategies for many years now, which is the ability to move contraband across borders can be very valuable. And so just like a licit firm, just like a Fortune 500 company might put offices around the world in order to take advantage of the larger market, illicit organizations also have an incentive to expand cross-border and take advantage of larger markets. So terrorism, insurgency, and crime are the three common buckets. And I gave you some sense of the definitions of how we historically think about these subcategories of violence across this litany of doom. The current topic that's getting a lot of attention in 2020 and 2021 that Charles and I are spending a lot of time thinking about and talking about is this idea of extremism and domestic terrorism. So domestic terrorism is terrorism, the same definition, violence or the threat of violence against innocent civilians or non-combatants for political purposes. And to the extent that that's taking place within a border and not across border doesn't mean it's not terrorism. It's still equally terrorism. And in fact, the US Department of Homeland Security has recently said that the number one threat facing the security of the American people, the number one threat facing the United States homeland, is the threat from domestic terrorism and not the threat from, say, an Al-Qaeda or international threats coming over our borders. So that's, Charles, my perspective on what I would call the substate violence, or something short of the big, near peer adversaries, and the way that you could think of it. You could think of it as firms, entrepreneurs, and markets. You could think of it as crime, insurgency, terrorism. And we'll unpack that a little bit more as we talk, but over to you to continue.
Thank you, Gary. And you raise a really important point about the real concern for domestic terrorism. We'll touch upon this a little bit later, but it's been a primary focus on a myriad of committees that have oversight of national security in the 116th Congress, as well as now the 117th Congress, more especially with the Committee on Homeland Security in the House and the Senate committee, its counterpart in the United States Senate. So I want to switch gears, Gary, a little bit and give the students at Morehouse College a flavor of a national security concern that we can't ignore, that we can't take our eye off of, and that's our near-peer adversaries. So we can unpackage this just a little bit. Think about in World War II, we were fighting against the Axis, right? Japan, Italy, Germany. Then we had the war in Korea. Then we had, Vietnam. And, later on, when Gary served, we had the war in Iraq. We revisited Iraq some years later when I deployed to Iraq. But near peer adversaries, as our threat landscape evolves, this remains the one security constant. These nation state actors, who we describe as near peer adversaries. And the two I'm going to focus on are Russia and China, more especially China. But Russia still remains a dominant military threat for a few reasons. Its strong, robust military, its real robust nuclear capability, their sphere of influence in former Soviet states, think Ukraine, and their sphere of influence as well in the Middle East. Think about their involvement in Syria. And another aspect to Russia's real rich capability and why we're always concerned about the threat that they pose is that Russia has a real robust disinformation. We saw this in the 2016 election. We see it being played out through bots, through deep fakes, through a whole myriad of communication tools, a lot of times permeated through social media. So we have to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to Russia. Now, in the last 20 years, China has grown to become a superpower, and they are an economic powerhouse and our economic rival. And a few experts believe that come 2028, that their economy will actually surpass the United States. So let me kind of just paint a broad picture of the threat that China poses. $3.3 trillion of trade passes through the South China Sea. That's trillion with a T. 40% of the world's global liquefied natural gas transits through the South China Sea. Now, a unique thing that China is doing is it's creating these man-made islands in the South China Sea. To be exact, 3,200 acres of military industrial outposts of new land, brand new land that China has created, specifically around the Spratly Island area since 2013. Additionally, China is a pervasive actor when it comes to intellectual property theft of the United States, resulting in between $225 and $600 billion loss annually in revenue. And that's a conservative number, conservative with a small c. Our universities that do advanced research, right? A lot of our rich capability that comes from private industry, a lot of our advanced technological prowess is being stolen by the Chinese government, resulting in lost revenue and China having the ability to stay on par or attempting to stay on par technologically with the United States. Just as recently as I want to say maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, FBI Director Wray informed Congress that that China remains the greatest counterintelligence threat to the United States. Just very briefly, for everyone's awareness, counterintelligence is defined as information gathered and activities conducted to identify, deceive, exploit, disrupt, or protect against espionage, okay? And so they remain that pervasive threat. And all of these things are part of every national security practitioner's calculus when trying to curb China's global influence and mitigate the threat they present, because we cannot ignore the fact that they are a major trade partner, right? And so that economic impact is also a calculus, right? But there's one tool that many nation states employ that can inflict a significant amount of damage to the US on multiple levels. I'm thinking economically, politically, affects our critical infrastructure, and that's cybersecurity. And to paint a picture of the cybersecurity landscape, I'm going to share a slide here. So this is a very, very busy slide, and it's busy on purpose, all right? So Momentum Cyber threw this amazing, amazing slide deck together to give everyone a flavor of what cybersecurity is. So you get 100 people in a room and ask them how they would define cybersecurity, you get 100 different answers, right? Everything from endpoint security to penetration testing, which is having ethical hackers constantly try to hack your network, identify vulnerabilities, and patch them. Internet of Things, think about like your refrigerator that now has Wi-Fi on it, right? Your dishwasher that now has Wi-Fi. There are even electric toothbrushes that have Bluetooth, right? That's the Internet of Things, right? Think about your remotes on your TV that have built-in microphones, or your televisions that have built-in microphones, right? Think about blockchain, cloud security. Just think about the recent SolarWinds attacks. This paints a picture of how complex our cybersecurity landscape is. There are literally hundreds of cybersecurity companies doing a myriad of things to try to keep either their network safe, American government networks safe, or the networks of municipalities safe. So I just want to present that. Now, another important factor is that all state actors use cyber as either a tool or a weapon. And the United States is no different. We have offensive and defensive cyber capabilities as well. But I want you to walk away with this. Cyber activity can be described as falling into typically 4 buckets: crime, hacktivism, espionage, and war. Or just think about CHIP: crime, hacktivism, espionage, and war. Crime, speaks for itself. Think ransomware. In 2019, the city of Atlanta was attacked with some ransomware, and they held the local officials, their networks and information hostage for payout. 2018, the same thing happened in Baltimore. Hacktivism, you really don't see too often. Hacktivism is, hacking for an ethical purpose, right? Espionage, we see all the time. It's pervasive. It's probably the most constant. And oftentimes, espionage and crime get bucketed together, because individuals that commit espionage on behalf of the state actor, sometimes that state, they turn a blind eye when that particular actor does crime related to cyber. And in war, of course, in the war, in the current battle space, cyber offensive and defensive capabilities constantly come into play. So I want you to also think about the information security triad, right? That's confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? So we want our information to be private, and we want to be able to share it with whom we want it shared with. We trust and we hope that individuals who access our private information and data are honest with it, that they're honest brokers, and that they won't do anything without our knowledge, our permission, with our personal data information. And of course, availability, right? It's 2021, information is on our fingertips. And now that we're in this world of Zoom that's been almost nonstop, we want information now, fast, readily available. But on the flip side, we're more exposed to these types of cyber adversaries or nefarious activity. And cyber security is just not an IT problem. and I have to be emphatic here. It's a federal problem. Think about the recent SolarWinds attack, where you have 9 federal agencies were compromised. It's a state and local issue. Think about the water treatment plant in Florida, right? That was hacked, and chemical levels in water treatment could be manipulated. Fortunately, there were safeguards in place where if certain chemicals rise above a certain level, there are measures that automatically kick in and shut things down. Um, and of course, think about the ransomware attacks that affect so many of our municipal levels. Um, I'm going to stop there, and I want Gary to chime in here to kind of give us a flavor of what we're seeing on the emerging technological side, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Hey, Charles, thanks. That's a great rundown on both the near peer adversaries and the cyber domain. And let me try to bring it together a little bit with an anecdote. So there's a good friend of mine who's a DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration agent, and he was in the DEA for basically forever, since before they created the DEA. He spent 40 years in federal law enforcement. And let me tell you about his career. So he started his career 40 years ago. And what he would do is he would travel around the world. He would take on an identity that is not his own. He would meet with very dangerous people in different places around the world. He would offer to buy large quantities of drugs from them. And then if they sold him the drugs, then he would work with the local law enforcement of the countries around the world, and he would get these people arrested. Okay, so I want all of the students to think about that for a second. So this is a career path. The career path is you travel around the world, you meet with really, really bad, dangerous people, like right out of a movie, and you offer them millions of dollars in exchange for drugs. And if they actually deliver drugs to you, then you put cuffs on them with partner law enforcement agencies around the world. That's been the nature of the way in which we combat these types of organizations for years. And we're going to continue to do that. So if that sounds interesting to you, then you do have a career in national security, because that is really interesting to a lot of folks. But it's the nature of the way in which illicit activities are evolving is moving much more into a virtual and online forum, where you don't actually have to get on airplanes and fly around anymore. You can transact, and these are economic transactions. You can transact virtually. And so the way I think about what we've talked about so far is sub-state violence, crime, insurgency, terrorism, or firm entrepreneur market, near peer adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, for example, and then opening this conversation on cyber. I think cyber is nothing more than a domain in which humans interact. And if you are interested in cyber, if you're interested in technology and the ways in which humans interact online, there's also a place for you in national security if that's as interesting to you. So everything that my friend, the DEA agent, did 40 years ago today is still happening today, but it's being disintermediated or being intermediated by technology and computers. So instead of human to human contact, there's human to computer, computer to human contact. And that's both a vulnerability to us and an opportunity to us. And that's why your generation, the current students of Morehouse, you're going to grow up and have better skills and understanding and ideas on how to combat threats in this domain, definitely, than me and and probably more than Charles. So something to think about. The world of online is one of the most important idea I would give you is one of identity. So if I want to engage in an economic transaction with Charles, I've known him for a couple of years. I sit down, I have a beer with him. We've developed trust over time, and we engage in some sort of an economic transaction. In internet space, I might meet with somebody who claims to be Charles, but it might not be him. I might not have the same opportunity to get to know him and to develop that personal relationship upon which we build trust, and trust then facilitates economic transactions. So the first order of business in the online world is establishing identity. I think from a technology perspective, and again, I've founded 2 technology companies in the last 10 years. I think there are massive amounts of money, research and development money, venture capital money, private equity money, government money, going into solving the problem of identity. Somebody approaches you, but not physically to have a coffee with you, but somebody approaches you virtually to establish a relationship and to engage in some sort of transaction. Knowing who that person is incredibly hard to do, and that's where we're seeing this massive spike in crimes today, in online fraud, online corruption, online coercion, and as Charles said, even in terms of offensive and defensive warfare. Right? If you could think of the ways in which Russia is trying to influence the U.S. elections, for example, and China is trying to, steal state secrets from the United States government. These could be thought of as acts of war today. They are acts being perpetrated by a foreign adversary for the purposes of undermining the security of us, of you and me. Right? So that's what's going on today. So establishing identity is critical. What does it mean to be human, and what does it mean then to establish verification for that human persona in an online forum? I will tell you it's largely unsolved today. There are 3 ways in which we've historically thought about identity. There's biographic information, biometric, and then behavior. Biographic information is if you're opening an account online and somebody says, what's your mother's maiden name? What year was your father born? Do you have any pets? Things like this. This is all biographic. This is all, by the way, for sale online. So there is no longer in 2021 a golden record of facts about you and me that other people can't buy in the illicit markets online. So if all of my information and your information is otherwise for sale online, then you can't verify it's me by asking me my mother's maiden name, right? Because for less than $5, you can figure out what my mother's maiden name was. So after biographic then becomes biometric. So the golden record doesn't exist. Biographics don't do it. So then we go to biometrics. Biometrics is your fingerprints, your retina, the way you walk, the way you talk, the image of your face. Those are good for establishing identity and verifying identity. However, those are also stealable. Right? There is a market for stolen biometrics, and especially if you're somewhat of a public person. I give lectures regularly in public forums, so people are able to steal my image, my voice, right? If you've never done that, maybe it would be harder for you. The third is behavioral, and I think behavioral is the holy grail of identity, which is how is somebody behaving? And is that consistent with the way that they behave? So if you wanted to steal my identity and we had behavioral patterns built into identity verification, you'd have to steal my pattern of behavior as well. And that's really hard to do. So we're moving into this world where different forms of illicit activity are enabled by the computer getting in between humans interacting with each other. And if this is interesting to you, this is a huge growth area and where we need lots of people to come in and help us figure this out. The world of machine learning and artificial intelligence, Charles, I think is the other topic that you wanted me to address here. And I have a very simple way of thinking about machine learning. And machine learning is pattern recognition. That's all it is. So machine learning is what's called inductive learning or learning by example. So if you have examples of something, if you have 10 million images of cat, then you can train an algorithm to identify images of cat. If you don't have 10 million images, you can't. A child can play with one cat for 15 minutes and have the concept of cat in her or his head, and then meet a totally different cat and understand that it's a cat. A computer can't do that. That's deductive reasoning. Computers, as of today, only do inductive reasoning. So you need lots of examples because computers learn patterns. That's machine learning. Artificial intelligence is an agent who sits on top of or next to that machine learning algorithm that perceives the world and reacts. So virtual assistants or Siri or different things that take an input and give you a response. All of those are artificial intelligences, which are agents that perceive the world and respond to the world. Artificial intelligence is not really yet weaponized, but I think in terms of the US government federal expenditures, it's at the top of the list of R&D concerns, which is that bringing some of these ideas together, China is a near peer adversary to the United States. The concern is that China has artificial intelligence capabilities that come close to, meet, or maybe even exceed the United States capabilities. Okay, so picture what that means for your generation. Growing up in a world where when I started my career, it was about missiles and weapon systems and who could go 1,000 miles versus 800 miles versus 600 miles with a precision guided munition, so that way we could win a kinetic battle. I think what's happening now is that the battle space is virtual and cyber, and the weapons could be machine learning and artificial intelligence based. And that's a world that I did not grow up in, that I'm probably less prepared for than you and your generation. So I would say that this is where we're going. We're going into 2021 with artificial intelligence as a top research and development priority for the national security community. So Charles and I have covered the threat landscape, all of the different ways in which you could worry about our safety and security. Charles, let's pivot and let's talk about the good actors and how we combat these things, and maybe how this generation of Morehouse men can come in and join us and help us in this fight.
Absolutely, Gary. So we set up the threat picture. Now let's talk about what we're doing to address the myriad of national security threats, or what Director Clapper would call the litany of doom, and foreign policy challenges facing our country. The executive branch and Congress have positioned themselves to mitigate and bring awareness to these hard problems. Specifically, for today's lecture, we will touch upon the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, the intelligence community, Treasury, and state, and we will end with the United States Congress and what they're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and share another screen here. So the Department of Defense, I want you all to look past that they're just the military because they are so much more. So the Department of Defense is our largest federal agency, okay? 2.9 million service members and civilians, okay? 4,800 sites, locations, offices, bases throughout the globe, and $740 billion in the national defense budget. So the Department of Defense, it's responsible for using military, obviously, to protect the United States abroad and at times the homeland. But there are myriad of defense agencies, activities that aid in this process. So one in particular, where Gary did research at, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, is responsible for some of our greatest inventions, right? The military, the internet kind of spun out of DARPA. It's advanced research dealing everything from artificial intelligence, machine learning, synthetic biology, advanced screening, advanced weapons and hypersonics, things of that nature. And some of our most brilliant and brightest minds come out of DARPA, Nobel Prize laureates, MacArthur geniuses, and absolutely amazing place. Think of the Q branch in the James Bond movies, but for the military. That's that's DARPA, okay? And you also have what we known as Combatant Commands, right? AFRICOM, CENTCOM or Central Command, Cyber Command, European Command. These combatant commands are responsible for an AOR, an area of responsibility that all military activity and engagement fall through, right? And we mentioned cyber because the virtual landscape is a battle space, right? So we have to take that into account. Next, we'll discuss Homeland Security. Gary used to work at DHS. I used to do oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. So DHS was formed in response to the attacks on 9/11 it was actually formed in legislation in 2002, the Homeland Security Act of 2002. It's the third largest federal agency, nearly 250,000 employees throughout the world. And there are 6 overarching missions that are very, very important to securing the homeland. And Gary talked about the first one earlier: counterterrorism and homeland security threats, securing our borders and approaches. Securing our border has been at the forefront of news and in Congress. Honestly, the past 6 years. Our cyberspace and critical infrastructure, which I touched upon earlier, is that third mission. Ensuring that we have economic security and prosperity cannot be overlooked. And that's the fourth mission. Preparedness and resilience. That's where kind of FEMA comes into play when there's natural disasters or significant societal events. I think of the current pandemic situation that we're in right now. And of course, the last portion is, ensuring that you have a rich and robust and well-trained and diverse workforce to tackle these hard problems. And so the box on the left are some of the operational agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, this vast behemoth of an organization. Citizenship and Immigration Services, our United States Coast Guard, I mentioned FEMA. CISA, which is our Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. They now just recently will be responsible for maintaining security of our .gov domains, right? That's our federal agencies' websites and networks. I mentioned the border, so we have our United States Customs and Border Protection. We have ICE, which is deals with immigration and customs. We've all are very familiar with TSA, our Transportation Security Administration. We see them at the airports. We also see them at other ports of entry, not just the air. FLETC, it's our robust law enforcement training center where various law enforcement personnel come to get rich training. And of course, our Secret Service that deal a lot with financial fraud, as well as protecting the president in its cabinet and their family members. Next, we have the United States intelligence community. This is where I spent 11 years of my career. 2 years with the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the Pentagon's version of the CIA, and 9 years with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which kind of oversees the 18 independent elements that make up the intelligence community, which are listed to the left. And Gary, it's funny, you know, I recently just added Space Force to this list. You know, for over a decade, I've been saying that there's 17 independent elements that make up the intelligence community, and it's now 18. So the bread and butter of what the intelligence community does is analysis. We do a lot. The bread and butter is analysis. What that means is painting a picture of what we think is taking place in the world, what we think is taking place with a particular foreign individual or group of individuals, what we think is taking place for a particular topical area. Think proliferation of nuclear weapons. Think terrorism. Think counterintelligence. We paint a picture of what we think is taking place, right? And we present facts as we understand them. Facts that we've pictures, facts, information that we've developed through a myriad of sources, some open source, meaning unclassified sources, and some other classified means, either through human channels or through technical collection.
Hotline for everyone.
Think pulling information from electronics and pulling information from other sources of equipment. And we present this information, this picture, to decision makers, either in the White House, from the president on down in his cabinet, to members of Congress, and in often cases to members of industry, businesses, schools, places of higher education. And we paint a picture of what we think is taking place. And it's up to that decision maker to act or not act on that information. And one thing I have to be clear about, the intelligence community is apolitical and does not prescribe policy. Despite what you may hear in the press, despite what you may come across in a blog, the United States intelligence community is apolitical. We just present facts as we understand them to decision makers who can choose to act or not act. Now they tell us, yes, Gary.
Can I jump in on that point?
Please.
Yeah,
please.
I think it's a great and important point. I want to try to. So if you are analytical, you're an analytical thinker, and you like to look at lots of different facts and condense them into something that's easily digestible, then you'd be an analyst. And in the intelligence community, that's what you do. So you don't make policy, you just synthesize the facts. So it's all positive versus normative analysis. If you want to be a policymaker, then you would go to one of those other components that Charles laid out in the Defense Department and Homeland Security, State Treasury, wherever, and then you would be a consumer of the analysis coming from the intelligence community, but that's where you become normative or make policy decisions on how the world should be. So the intelligence community's job is how the world is, and then the policy-making community, which is totally different legal authorities, is how the world should be, and that's the role of a policymaker. It's a really important distinction to know where do you want to be? Are you more comfortable on the intelligence side or on the policymaking side or on the operational side? Charles.
Thank you, Gary. So I was an Intel analyst for almost 5 years. And so I equated to this. You're putting together a puzzle with the pieces facing down. And maybe, just maybe, let's say you have 1,000 pieces, you may have just a couple that are turned up. And it's your job, it's your responsibility to put together this puzzle so you have an idea what's taking place. And then you present that puzzle to decision makers. Now, as Gary alluded, there's also an operational component to the intelligence community. That's when we deal with some clandestine activity, targeting, as well as some offensive cyber capabilities. Think NSA. When I deployed to Iraq at the height of the Iraq War. I deployed with special forces, but I was not in an analytical role. I was more operational, doing targeting, which was essentially identifying terrorists that want to do harm to Americans, to our allies, to our assets. Okay. Now, here we come to Congress. It's important that we understand the role of Congress when it comes to national security. Primarily two things, right? Article 1 gives Congress the ability to, pass laws, write legislation, spend money, or what we call appropriate money, and conduct oversight. Okay, and there are numerous committees on Capitol Hill that conduct oversight, and you have the House that have theirs, and then you have their Senate side counterpart. Okay, so in the House of Representatives, I spent 1 year most recently with the Committee on Homeland Security, which you see at the top left, chaired by Benny Thompson from Mississippi. I spent 1 year there advising Chairman Thompson and other committee members on a myriad of intelligence and homeland issues. Now, its counterpart is the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, where I was in 2015 when I was a Brookings Institution fellow, advising then ranking member Tom Carper on a myriad of national security and homeland issues. I was there in 2015 during the heart of the Iran deal, and I was advising Senator Carper on Iran and how to vote. But going on down the line, you see HITSI and SISI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which obviously conducts oversight of the intelligence community, Foreign Affairs and Foreign Relations, obviously oversight of the State Department, our armed services committees in the House and Senate, which oversee the military and the broader Defense Department, and the Appropriations Committee, which provide the funding. So with that, I am going to switch gears to you, Gary, because there are a couple of other good actors I did not touch about, primarily state, treasury, and you probably want to add some things to DHS since you work there.
Yeah, Charles, no, that was a super rundown. I would say that, so I spent about 4 years in the Senate, and I think there's a big difference between authorizers and appropriators. So there's people who set policy and there's people who actually write the checks for the budgets. And there's a little bit of back and forth in the Congress. So there's, Republicans, Democrats, there's House, there's Senate, there's authorizers, appropriators. So there's lots of opportunity for debate, which is a good thing. And then there's Congress and the executive branch. So the executive branch actually is the government, and Congress just exercises oversight and power of the purse, right? So the president of the United States is the chief executive of the US federal or national government, and the chief executive, as the president as chief executive, has to answer questions to Congress and has to ask money from Congress, has no budget authority in the absence of getting money from Congress. So it's tremendous authority that the Congress has in directing the policy of the United States government. By the way, states and cities don't work for the president. So we don't have it's not a corporate structure in the sense that the CEO has presidents of divisions and units. So governors don't work for the president, and mayors don't work for the governor. They're all chief executives in their own right. Really interesting, an important point when it comes to like the domestic terrorism and the emergency response and the FEMA type missions. So that's what I learned from, when I worked in the Department of Homeland Security in the very early days. I was there, Charles, at the start when we were first building the Department of Homeland Security, and understanding that the Department of Homeland Security has the expectation that they will prevent terrorists and weapons from crossing the borders, and therefore prevent large conflagrations like 9/11 type attacks. And yet so much of implementing those programs and achieving success relies upon collaboration with governors, with mayors, and with our foreign counterparts, friends and allies around the world. So I think that's a really important insight into the Homeland Security mission. The Department of Justice is worth mentioning. The Federal Bureau of Investigations is the lead investigative agency of the United States government. So they can take priority in any sort of terrorism or counterterrorism investigation, whether in the United States or abroad. The intelligence community is legally prohibited from any activity inside of the United States, so they only act overseas. The Treasury Department is a fascinating place. It's believe it or not, a small department when compared to DoD, DHS, and state, but it has tremendous power and influence and authority, and that is the Treasury Department regulates or has the authority over who has access to US dollars. And US dollars are the preferred and reserve currency for the entire global economy. So the Treasury Department has tremendous power and authority globally in the national security world because of its powers and authorities over the US dollar, which are just tremendous. And if that's interesting to you, there's a phenomenal career in the role of money and monetary instruments in national security and foreign policy. And especially as we get into this cyber world where we have Bitcoins and cyber currencies and things like that. And finally, I'd say the State Department obviously has the core of diplomats that represent the United States around the world. And if that's interesting to you, the State Department is a phenomenal career path and a career track if you're interested in diplomacy and foreign policy. Charles, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of covering the landscape of all of the threats, past, present, and as we go into the future, and then the institutions of the U.S. national government, U.S. federal government, as they are comprised today in terms of addressing those threats.
Absolutely, Gary. I think we can close out, and let me just state, as an alum of Morehouse College, class of 2005, it's truly an honor to be able to speak and present to you at our Dear Crown Forum. If this is interesting to you, if you want a richer understanding a deeper dive into these topics. We're going to have 2 additional sessions where we get into the weeds a little bit. It'll be a more substantive discussion on all the topics that we hit upon, including that Article 1 of the United States Constitution, which implicitly states the power of Congress to make laws, declare war, raise an army and navy, regulate our armed forces, raise and provide public money, and oversee its expenditure, and approve treaties that are been negotiated by the executive branch, of course, to conduct oversight and investigations. Thank you, Morehouse College. Thank you for your time. I really, really appreciate being able to speak with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dear old